In the heart of Europe, there is a contradiction so deep it refuses to be explained away. A people surrounded on all sides by Indo-European nations, yet not Indo-European themselves. A language spoken in the shadow of Rome, yet untouched by Latin. A genetic signature that does not fit Europe's grand migration story, yet sits right at its center. This is not a footnote in history. It is a fault line. Between the green slopes of northern Spain and the jagged ridges of southern France lives a people who, by every rule of European history, should not exist. They were not erased by conquest. They were not absorbed by empires. They were not linguistically overwritten. While Celts vanished, Iberians disappeared, and ancient tongues dissolved into Latin, Germanic, and Slavic descendants, one voice remained unchanged: the Basques. To historians, they are an anomaly. To linguists, a nightmare. To geneticists, a living fossil. Their language has no known relatives, no parent, no siblings, no proven cousins. It does not descend from Proto-Indo-European, the linguistic ancestor of nearly every European language spoken today. It does not resemble Latin, Greek, Celtic, Germanic, or Slavic. It does not behave like them. It does not think like them. And their DNA tells the same story. When modern genetic mapping laid Europe bare, revealing wave after wave of migration from the Ice Age to the Bronze Age, one region refused to blend in. While most Europeans carry heavy genetic imprints from steppe nomads who arrived around 4,500 years ago, the Basques do not. While neighboring populations show layers of replacement and mixture, Basque genomes remain stubbornly consistent. They are European, but not like the rest of Europe. This has led to a dangerous word being whispered, half joking, half serious: alien, not from another planet, but from another time. Because everything about the Basques points backward, back beyond Rome, back beyond farming, back beyond written history itself. Their language sounds like nothing else on the continent. Their grammar operates on rules that feel misplaced in Europe. Their genetic profile resembles ancient skeletons more than modern neighbors. And here's the unsettling part. The Basques are not remnants hiding in caves or isolated museums of humanity. They are alive, modern, urban, educated, speaking the same impossible language their ancestors spoke while mammoths still walked the continent, which raises a question that Europe has never been able to answer. How did they survive? To understand why Basque DNA and language feel alien to Europe, we must abandon the neat story Europe tells about itself. The story of orderly progress, of tribes becoming nations, of cultures smoothly replacing one another. Because the Basques exposed the lie at the center of that narrative. Europe was not built cleanly, it was overwritten. And the Basques are what survived the erasure. Long before Europe was Europe, before borders, before kingdoms, before the very idea of European, this land was occupied by hunter-gatherers who had lived there for tens of thousands of years. They spoke languages we no longer know. They organized their world in ways we can only glimpse through bone and stone. When the glaciers retreated and the Ice Age loosened its grip, these people spread across the continent. They were the first Europeans in any meaningful sense, dark-skinned, blue-eyed, adapted to forests, coasts, and mountains. For millennia, Europe belonged to them alone. Then came the first great disruption. Around 9,000 years ago, farmers from the Near East began moving into Europe, bringing agriculture, livestock, pottery, and permanent settlements. This was not simply a cultural exchange, it was a demographic shockwave. In much of Europe, these farmers replaced the hunter-gatherers almost entirely. Languages vanished, genetic lineages collapsed, worldviews disappeared. Europe was rewritten. Later came the second erasure. Around 4,500 years ago, pastoralists from the Eurasian steppes swept westward. They rode horses. They carried bronze weapons. They spoke Proto-Indo-European, the language family that would dominate nearly the entire continent. This wave changed everything again. It gave rise to Celtic, Italic, Germanic, Slavic, Greek, Indo-Iranian. It reshaped social structures, hierarchies, and belief systems. In most places, it did not mix gently, it replaced. By the end of the Bronze Age, Europe had been transformed twice. Its original languages were gone, its original genetic landscape buried beneath layers of newcomers, except in one place, the Basque homeland. There, the waves broke, not because the Basques were stronger, not because they were more advanced, but because geography, timing, and culture aligned in a way that never happened anywhere else. The Pyrenees did not just separate lands, they slowed history. While Indo-European languages spread like wildfire over open plains and river valleys, the mountains acted as a filter. Migration still occurred, but it fractured, diluted, and redirected. The Basque region became a genetic cul-de-sac, a place where ancient lineages could persist rather than be erased. But mountains alone do not preserve a language for thousands of years. Something else was happening. The Basque language did not simply survive invasion. It resisted absorption. It did not borrow deeply. It did not restructure itself to fit Indo-European patterns. It remained internally consistent while everything around it changed. Linguists call it Euskera, a pre-Indo-European isolate. That term sounds technical, but its meaning is explosive. It means that Euskera is not just old, it's unrelated.
Every attempt to link it to another language family has failed, not weakened, failed. No shared grammar, no consistent sound correspondences, no reconstructible ancestor. It stands alone, a linguistic island in a sea of relatives. Its structure feels foreign to Europe. It uses ergativity, a grammatical system more common in the Caucasus, the Andes, or parts of Australia. It encodes relationships inside verbs that Indo-European languages express with separate words. It organizes thought differently. This is why, to European linguistics, Euskara feels misplaced, as if it wandered in from another continent or survived from a world that no longer exists, and its survival was not accidental. Language became a wall. Marriage patterns followed dialect boundaries. Villages just kilometers apart, speaking slightly different forms of Euskara, remained genetically distinct for centuries. Language shaped bloodlines. Speech controlled gene flow. Every word reinforced isolation. Europe assimilated through language. The Basques resisted through it. And while Rome conquered Iberia, while Latin swallowed Celtic and Iberian tongues, Euskara remained. The Romans labeled the people Vascones and built roads around their territory, not through it. They traded, they taxed, they avoided. Later empires tried again. Visigoths, Franks, kingdoms rose and fell, borders shifted. The Basques endured, not untouched, but unabsorbed. By the time Europe began writing its own history, the Basques were already ancient, which brings us back to the unease they provoke. Because when modern DNA studies peeled back Europe's genetic layers, they revealed something deeply uncomfortable. The Basques are not an outlier because they are exotic. They are an outlier because they are familiar, too familiar. Their DNA resembles ancient European skeletons more closely than it resembles their modern neighbors. They carry genetic patterns that once dominated the continent, now almost entirely gone. They are not aliens. They are survivors, and survival at this scale exposes what was lost. The Basques are Europe's memory that refused to fade, a living record of a population that once stretched far beyond the Pyrenees, speaking languages that left no descendants. When people say Basque DNA and language feel alien to Europe, what they really mean is this: Europe forgot where it came from, and the Basques did not. To truly understand why Basque DNA and language feel alien inside Europe, we must confront a truth that modern Europeans rarely like to face. The continent's story is not of steady evolution. It is a story of repeated replacement, of cultures overwritten so completely that even their names vanished. The Basques are unsettling because they interrupt that pattern. They are what Europe used to be. When geneticists first began sequencing ancient European remains in the early 21st century, expectations were clear. Modern populations, it was assumed, would be messy blends of all the migrations that passed through their regions, layers upon layers. No continuity, no purity, just gradients. Then the Basque data arrived. Instead of showing the heavy steppe ancestry common across Western Europe, Basque genomes showed something else: continuity, stability, a deep connection to Neolithic farmers mixed with even older Western hunter-gatherers, the kind of genetic profile expected to be extinct. Most Europeans today carry significant ancestry from steppe pastoralists who arrived during the Bronze Age. In some regions, that ancestry reaches 40 to 60%. In the Basque population, it is dramatically lower, almost absent in some analyses. This was not a small deviation, it was a structural exception. The Basques were not simply isolated villagers who avoided mixing. They lived on major trade routes between the Atlantic and Mediterranean. They interacted with Romans, Celts, Franks, and Iberians. Yet genetically, they absorbed remarkably little. This forced scientists to reconsider a dangerous assumption that migration always equals replacement. In most of Europe, that assumption holds. In the Basque homeland, it does not. Instead of being overwritten by each new wave, the Basques acted as a genetic reservoir. They absorbed early farmers, but resisted later steppe dominance. Their genome became a snapshot of Europe at a specific moment in time, frozen just before the Bronze Age transformation. This is why their DNA feels alien. It belongs to a Europe that no longer exists, and the same is true of their language. Euskara does not just predate Indo-European languages, it predates the conditions that allowed Indo-European languages to dominate. It belongs to a Europe before mass migrations, before horse warfare, before hierarchical chiefdoms reshaped society. In linguistic terms, Euskara is a survivor of the pre-Indo-European linguistic ecology, a time when Europe did not share a single dominant language family, but hundreds of local tongues tied to specific landscapes and communities. That world was wiped out almost everywhere, except here. Linguists once hoped Euskara might be linked to ancient Iberian inscriptions found along Spain's eastern coast. The hope was logical. If Iberian and Basque were related, Euskara would finally have a family, a context, a place. The problem is that the connection never held. While Iberian writing can be partially read phonetically, its structure does not align with Euskara. Grammar, morphology, syntax all diverge. Shared vocabulary is minimal and inconclusive. If there was a relationship, it is too deep to reconstruct. Other theories followed: Caucasian, North African, even distant ties to languages spoken thousands of kilometers away. Each proposal generated excitement. Each collapsed under scrutiny. Euskara remains alone, and that loneliness is not accidental. Languages disappear when speakers shift identity. When adopting a new language offers power, safety, or status, the Basques resisted that shift again and again. They adopted tools, technologies, even political structures from outsiders, but they refused linguistic surrender. This refusal created a feedback loop.
Language reinforced identity. Identity reinforced endogamy. Endogamy reinforced genetic continuity. By the Middle Ages, this process had been operating for thousands of years. The Basques were not static, they were adaptive, but adaptation happened on their terms. When Christianity spread, they converted without abandoning Euskara. When feudal systems emerged, they integrated them into older legal traditions rather than replacing them. Their local laws, the fueros, preserved community autonomy long after similar systems vanished elsewhere. This autonomy mattered because every time Europe centralized, standardized, and homogenized, the Basques remained locally governed. They answered to kings when necessary, but governed daily life according to their own rules. Language, law, and land remained intertwined. The mountains helped, but culture did the real work. This became painfully clear in the modern era. In the 20th century, Spain attempted what Rome never fully dared: total assimilation. Under Franco's dictatorship, regional identities were targeted as threats to national unity. Euskara was banned from public life. Children were punished for speaking it. Names were forcibly Castellanistized. For the first time in history, Basque language transmission was actively disrupted, and something remarkable happened. Instead of collapsing, Euskara went underground. Families whispered it at home. Communities taught it in secret. Songs, prayers, and stories carried it through decades of repression. Why did they fight so hard? Because by then, language was no longer just communication. It was memory. It was ancestry spoken aloud. Losing Euskara would have meant severing a chain that stretched back beyond history. When Franco's regime ended, Euskara resurfaced with force. It returned to schools, universities, media, and governance. Today, it is standardized, digitized, and taught with modern linguistic tools, an ancient language adapted to a modern world. And its DNA followed the same pattern, because while the Basques preserved ancient genetic lineages, they did not become biologically stagnant. Their population remained healthy, resilient, and diverse within its own framework. Genetic studies show fine-scale variation between valleys, towns, even villages, not drift, structure. This is where the idea of alien begins to crumble. The Basques are not frozen relics. They are living systems that preserved continuity without stagnation, a rare case where ancient identity did not collapse under modern pressure. Europe changed by replacing itself. The Basques changed by accumulating. And this difference unsettles modern narratives, because if the Basques could survive without being overwritten, then European history is not inevitable. It is contingent, violent, selective. It suggests that what we call European civilization is not a natural progression, but the result of who survived and who did not. The Basques remind us of the ones who didn't. Their DNA is not alien because it is strange. It is alien because it remembers too much. And their language is not impossible because it is primitive. It is impossible because it exposes how much was erased. To the rest of Europe, they are an exception. To prehistory, they are continuity. And continuity, in a continent built on replacement, feels profoundly unnatural. The final reason Basque DNA and language feel alien to Europe is not scientific, it is psychological. The Basques expose a truth that modern Europe quietly avoids, that beneath the flags, the nations, the shared Indo-European roots, there is a buried continent, a Europe that spoke different words, thought in different structures, and carried different blood. The Basques are not outsiders to Europe. They are what Europe buried to become itself. When we say their DNA is alien, what we are really saying is that it does not conform to the dominant European pattern. But that pattern is not ancient. It is relatively recent. It is the result of Bronze Age upheavals, Iron Age consolidations, Roman standardization, and medieval nation building. Strip those layers away, and the Basques no longer look strange. They look familiar. Too familiar. Because ancient DNA recovered from Ice Age caves and Neolithic burial sites across Western Europe shows something remarkable. Before the steppe migrations, before Indo-European dominance, much of Europe looked genetically closer to modern Basques than to modern Europeans. The difference is not that Basques failed to evolve, it is that Europe evolved by forgetting. The Basques remember. Their genetic profile preserves a balance that once defined the continent. Western hunter-gatherer ancestry combined with early farmer lineages, unbroken by later demographic replacement. This balance is what Europe lost when horse-mounted pastoralists reshaped its population structure. In most regions, that change was total. In the Basque homeland, it stalled. This is why geneticists sometimes describe Basque DNA as a reference point, a baseline, a control sample, not because it is superior or pure, but because it is continuous. It allows scientists to reconstruct what Europe looked like before it was transformed. In that sense, Basque DNA is not alien at all. It is ancestral. And the same is true of Euskara. The language feels foreign because it does not share Europe's grammatical instincts. It does not organize sentences in the way Indo-European languages do. It does not prioritize subjects and objects in familiar ways. It embeds relationships inside verbs. It marks agency differently. It encodes reality through a
structure Europe abandoned long ago. When Indo-European languages spread, they did more than replace words. They replaced ways of thinking. They imposed a shared cognitive framework across the continent. This is why European languages feel intuitively related, even when speakers cannot understand each other. Euskara never joined that system. It preserved an older framework, one shaped by small-scale societies, intimate landscapes, and local continuity. A framework where meaning is relational, not hierarchical, where grammar reflects interaction rather than domination. This is why linguists struggle with it, not because it is underdeveloped, but because it is developed along a different evolutionary path. It is not behind Europe's languages, it branched before them.
And because that branch was cut everywhere else, Euskara stands alone. This isolation created a cultural phenomenon rare in human history, a people who maintained identity without expansion, who preserved continuity without empire, who resisted assimilation not through conquest, but through refusal. The Basques did not impose themselves on others. They simply did not disappear. This passive resistance is what allowed their genetic and linguistic heritage to survive when far larger populations vanished. Empires collapse loudly. Small cultures disappear quietly. The Basques did neither. They endured. Even in the modern era, when globalization, urbanization, and mass media erased countless minority languages, Euskara adapted. It standardized without losing depth. It entered universities without losing intimacy. It became digital without losing ancestry. At the same time, Basque genetics became a tool for understanding humanity itself, because their population stability allows researchers to detect genetic patterns obscured elsewhere, disease markers, inheritance structures, evolutionary processes that vanish in more mixed populations. Their isolation became a gift, the past illuminating the future. This creates the final paradox. A people whose roots stretch back to mammoth hunters are now leaders in biotechnology, renewable energy, architecture, and culinary innovation. A language shaped before writing now powers artificial intelligence models and academic research. Ancient does not mean obsolete. The Basques prove that survival does not require dominance, that continuity does not require stagnation, that identity can persist without conquest. So why does Europe still describe them as alien? Because their existence undermines the story Europe tells about itself, the story of linear progress, of inevitable cultural replacement, of shared origins rooted in Indo-European expansion. The Basques are the proof that this story is incomplete. They are the echo of a Europe before Europe, a reminder that civilization is not built only by winners, that some histories survive not by spreading, but by holding. When you hear Euskara spoken today, you are not hearing a regional curiosity. You are hearing the last living voice of a linguistic world that once covered the continent. When you look at Basque DNA, you are not seeing an anomaly. You are seeing a mirror held up to a forgotten past. The Basques are not alien to Europe. They are Europe's original shadow, and that is why they feel impossible. If you want more stories buried beneath modern history, stories written in DNA, language, and forgotten memory, make sure you subscribe, because some histories were never meant to disappear.